Hi, everyone. We're live here, and I'm so excited about my guest today, Courtland Bragg, ESPN 30 for 30. How are you, sir? And it's got to be great as I have Lefty, my filmmaker, on the line as well. First ever live stream celebrity interview. Can you believe it? In the years I've been doing all this stuff and all this, and it's got to be so real before we get to the questions of being able to get this story out and be part of this, right, Courtland?
Yes, it's so cool to continuously be able to tell stories of Reggie White, a great man, larger than life figure who just had an incredible life.
He did such great stuff. Oh my gosh! And when his passing was so hard on me, especially as an Eagles fan. Okay, go ahead. Go ahead, Lefty. First question.
Yeah. So, what was the most challenging part of balancing Reggie White's legacy with the mystery of the church burning in your storytelling process?
There are many challenging parts. I think the first thing is just for listeners to know I'm a filmmaker, that I tell stories of football players,
Yeah.
coaches, and the National Football League. Telling the story of the inner city church fire was very challenging for me in the sense that I had to put my investigative journalism hat on, and that's something I didn't know I had. And trying to tell a story where there's accusations and there's a crime that's so ugly and that tore apart a place of worship that was a beacon of hope in a community, and Reggie trying so hard to shed light and try to figure out who did this. It was hard for me. And another part was, there's a personal tie for me. My father is a preacher and pastor, just like Reggie, and my grandfather was. So this was kind of a personal journey for me that had me conflicted with my own moral compass. Like, could someone, some of the lead suspects, who the government thought did this, was like, could had me questioning, like, could that really happen? And so it just really was an interesting experience for me, but one that I wanted to tell in a right way, in a right fashion, to do this story justice, and not
Mhm.
lean on one side over the other, but present the facts and allow the listeners to make their own judgment.
This think about that and kind of piggyback on that fact is you're just like you love talking NFL. You love to tell stories about NFL. And a lot of times when you do documentaries, you go deeper into things, but not to this kind of a tragic thing in any of your other documentary work you've done. It's that to the point where we want to know why would something be so horrific as this, even though, people lose lives, they end up in a bad situation, abuse, all those stories, but something where Reggie was putting such of his heart and soul, and to find out later that his church gets burned, it's awful.
It's awful. And I think another tough part that I never had the opportunity to meet Reggie, but just talking to his family and friends and doing my research and doing his story for the time I did, there was a lot of resources that poured into finding out who did this. This went all the way up to President Bill Clinton. The Department of Justice got involved, the ATF got involved, the FBI got involved. And just to think that almost 30 years later, no one's ever been brought in, no one's ever been arrested, no one's ever been convicted, there's never been a trial. It's just, it raises so many questions to see, like, what happened, what went wrong. Did the ATF get it right? Did the FBI get it right? Was it plain and clear who did this? I don't want to divulge too many information. You got to check out the podcast, but it was such an interesting journey for me, and an experience to do this story, because it's so
Yeah.
out of the realm of what we do as storytellers for the NFL.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's crazy to know that there's so much mystery still around it. So, and you brought up something interesting, and that kind of leads me into my next question of, is there anything that you can share from behind the scenes of like challenges that you might have faced while producing the 30 for 30 episode?
Yeah, so I, I'm gonna try to be careful not giving too much, but trying to do your due diligence as a journalist, you have to dig deep. You have to ask questions. So looking at the lead suspects, trying to track lead suspects down. One of them unfortunately is deceased. So the other lead suspect, trying to get an interview on a record, and do a fair job of learning more about Reggie, but also, doing my job of, I have to ask you, these accusations are against you. doing that, but also doing your due diligence of trying to submit a FOIA request. I didn't even know what a FOIA was, and doing that and learning how a FOIA request works and how long it takes to hear back. Like that, there's many challenges within that, and kind of getting the results from the FOIA request, and maybe not being satisfied with those, and but you have a deadline. So for me was I wanted to ensure that I did my journalistic job, and me and my team, our lead producers, a part of it, and to the end, just knowing that we did our job and we told the story in a fair way. We didn't lean on any side. We presented the facts and we told a story, and allowing one that hopefully is entertaining, but also allows the viewer to make their own judgments on who did this.
All right. Lefty, as a storyteller yourself, you just understand this. You have to really set things up, don't you, Lefty, in this process when you're going to tell my story as well, that you kind of really have to, do you like take the place of the person when you're doing your stories, Lefty? Just like what Courtland's talking about in certain ways?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of have to a little bit. You kind of have to the person that you're essentially doing the story about, you kind of have to, put their shoes on and see the way they might have dealt with that situation or how they spoke to this person or that person. It's a lot of getting into like specific mental states, kind of like how actors get into like a certain character, but we're doing it with like real people, not fictional characters.
And this being a podcast, Courtland, is this different for you, a podcast compared to other types of things? Like, are you getting used to the whole deal of the podcast and doing a podcast and how you record it and how you make it really entertaining? Because people are just podcasting, listening to podcasts and streaming things all the time. What a great idea to go deeper with the podcast.
Yes, and thank you. I'm super thankful to the execs here at NFL Films and ESPN for giving me this opportunity. But the podcasting is something that's just I had no knowledge of. I listen to podcasts occasionally, but to be able to do the story, I learned that you have to. Everything isn't visual. Usually in my line of work, it's B-roll, and I can give context or an interview bite or write a narration script. Here, it's like you have listeners cannot see what you're saying, so you have to make sure you give details and you draw things out so everyone can understand. So it's a very interesting opportunity and experience for me, and I'm super glad that I was able to have this experience.
Fantastic. And is the podcast available now? Can you check it out on all the podcast sites?
Yes, so podcasts can be found anywhere you get your podcast. Prefer you go through Apple Podcasts, but Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast, you can tune in. The episode released yesterday, so please tune in.
And is that the interesting thing of promoting a podcast? Because I'm sure, everyone knows podcasting so much more than before. They're just still learning. And I'm finally getting to be, even though I always love calling a radio TV host. Now I'm trying, it's cool to be a podcaster. It wasn't 5 years ago. Trust me, Courtland. I appreciate it, man. Thanks for stopping by.
Thank you.
All right. You're listening and watching the Neil Haley Show, and we'll be back in just a moment.